Yeah.
All right, we are on Genesis 33. I have no breaks. So where does Worsby break, Kathy? Or could we do the whole thing? We might be able to do the whole thing. Is he long?
I would say from what he has, you could do the whole thing.
All right, Kim, are you up to reading this morning?
Yes, I can. All right. Genesis 33. The brothers make peace. Then, far in the distance, Jacob saw Esau coming with his 400 men. Jacob now arranged his family into a column with his two concubines and their children at the head, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then Jacob went on ahead. As he approached his brother, he bowed low 7 times before him. And then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him affectionately and kissed him, and both of them were in tears. 5. Then Esau looked at the women and children and asked, "Who are these people with you?" "My children," Jacob replied. Then the concubines came forward with their children and bowed low before him. Next came Leah with her children and bowed, and finally Rachel and Joseph came and made their bows. "And what were all the flocks and herds I met as I came?" Esau asked. And Jacob replied, "They are my gifts to curry your favor." "Brother, I have plenty," Esau laughed. "Keep what you have." "No, but please accept them," Jacob said, "for what a relief it is to see your friendly smile. I was as frightened of you as though approaching God. Please take my gifts, for God has been very generous to me, and I have enough." So Jacob insisted, and finally Esau accepted them. "Well, let's be going," Esau said. "My men and I will stay with you and lead the way." But Jacob replied, "As you can see, some of the children are small, and the flocks and herds have their young, and if they are driven too hard, they will die. So you go ahead of us, and we'll follow at our own pace and meet you at Seir." "Well," Esau said, "at least let me leave you some of my men to assist you and be your guides." "No," Jacob insisted. "We'll get along just fine. Please do as I suggest." So Esau started back to Seir that same day. Meanwhile, Jacob and his household went as far as Succoth. There he built himself a camp with pens for his flocks and herds. That is why the place is called Succoth, meaning huts. Then they arrived safely at Shechem in Canaan and camped outside the city. He bought the land he camped on from the family of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of silver. And there he erected an altar and called it El Elohi Israel, the altar to God, an altar to the God of Israel.
Hmm. What else happened at Seir? I feel like something else was going on at Seir that we've been reading. Does anybody remember? He says, "Until I come to my Lord in Seir." Does he call
It's
it?
in 32, verse 3.
What is it? 32 verse
It,
3.
it, yeah, it's mentioned in 32.
Oh, so he's calling Esau his Lord in the land
Yes.
of Seir. Okay. Yes, because he says there too, that you shall say to my Lord Esau. So I wonder if he is because I was thinking about, like Jacob was supposed to inherit everything and like the double portion and be the leader of the household, but he hasn't been there for 20 years. So I wonder then if Esau actually has been doing that because he's calling Esau his Lord. And he definitely got the spiritual blessing because Jesus does come through his line, but I found it interesting too that he bowed 7 times. I wonder what the meaning is behind that. Any other thoughts before Cindy reads out of John MacArthur?
In my notes, it says bowing to the ground 7 times was a sign of respect given to a king.
Oh, wow. He really was calling him his Lord then. He might have been like, oh, we were young and dumb, but I'm kind of over it now. It also reminded me of the prodigal son. Here comes Jacob back after he'd been so like disrespectful and irresponsible, all the things. And instead of Esau like chopping him off, he was so happy to see him. All right, Cindy, whenever you're ready.
Okay, verses 1 and 2. Jacob hastily divided his family into 3 groups and went ahead of them to meet his brother. The division and relative location of his family in relationship to the perceived danger gives tremendous insight into whom Jacob favored. Verses 3 and 4. Fearfully and deferentially, Jacob approached his brother as an inferior would a highly honored patron, while gladly and eagerly Esau ran to greet his brother without restraint of emotion. They wept because after 21 years of troubling separation, old memories were wiped away and murderous threats belong to the distant past. Hearts have been changed, brothers reconciled. Verses 5 to 11. Family introductions and an explanation of the gift of 500 animals properly acknowledge the gracious provision of the Lord upon Jacob's life. The battle for generosity was won by Jacob when Esau, who initially refused to take anything from his brother, finally agreed to do so. Verse 10, your face, the face of God. Jacob acknowledged how God had so obviously changed Esau, as indicated by his facial expression, which was not one of sullen hate, but of brotherly love, divinely wrought and restored. Verse 15, let me find favor. Jacob did not want to have Esau's people loaned to him for fear something might happen to again fracture their relationship. 16 and 17, to Seir, to Succoth. With Esau's planned escort courteously dismissed, they parted company. Jacob's expressed intention to meet again in Seir, for whatever reason, did not materialize. Instead, Jacob halted his journey first at Succoth, then at Shechem. Succoth is east of the Jordan River, 20 miles east of Shechem, which is 65 miles north of Jerusalem, located between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim.
Okay, can you tell me again? So he said he was going to Seir to Esau's, but then he didn't, but we don't know why. And he ended up 20 miles where?
East of Shechem.
Here we are with the east
Verse
again.
Yeah, that's true. Verse 18 came safely. 1908 BC, a reference to the fulfillment of Jacob's vow made at Bethel when, upon departure from Canaan, he looked to God for a safe return. Upon arrival in Canaan, he would tithe his possessions, and that was in chapter 28. Presumably, Jacob fulfilled his pledge at Shechem or later at Bethel. Verse 19, bought the parcel of land. This purchase became only the second piece of real estate legally belonging to Abraham's line in the promised land. However,
second piece of real estate
legally belonging to Abraham's line in the promised land.
Thank you.
However, the land was not Abraham and his descendants simply because they bought it, but rather because God owned it all. And there's a reference to Leviticus 25, verse 23. And gave it to them for their exclusive domain. Verse 20, erected an altar in the place where Abraham had first built an altar, reference chapter 12, verses 6 and 7. Jacob similarly marked the spot with a new name, incorporating a new name, God, the God of Israel, declaring that he worshiped the Mighty One. Israel perhaps foreshadowed its use for the nation with which it rapidly became associated, even when it consisted of not much more than Jacob's extended household. That's it for 33.
That verse, Leviticus 25:23 says, the land shall not be sold in perpetuity, for the land is mine. I found it interesting. First, he had the servant women. I love like how the wording mine uses there in verse 6. It says, then the servants drew near, they and their children, which shows I think that the kids did stay with their moms, even though they were adopted by Jacob and Leah and Rachel, because the children were with them, and bowed down. It says, then Leah likewise and her children. So now the servants and their children, Leah and her children. And then it doesn't, when it gets down here to, and last, Joseph and Rachel, it doesn't say anything about their children. Did they not have children at this point?
Joseph is Rachel's child, Chrissy.
Oh, you're right. I was thinking Jacob. Thank you.
Certainly.
I even wrote Jacob down and it wasn't. It was Joseph. That's right, because she dies in childbirth with Benjamin, right? So they specifically name him.
Well, they were put out there the way Jacob felt about them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the maid servants, then poor Leah.
That's what
And then
Cindy said. That's his favorite.
Back in the safe part was Rachel.
So I was thinking too down there in when he went away from Esau, he ended up 20 miles east of Shechem, which was the Sukkoth, right? And then he ended up in Shechem, where he bought the land.
There's a note in my Bible there. Why did Jacob imply that he was going to Seir, but then stop at Succoth? We don't know the answer, but perhaps Jacob decided to stop there as they journeyed because Succoth is a beautiful site on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Whatever the reason, Jacob and Esau parted in peace. but they still lived fairly close to each other until after their father's death, which is apparently going to be in verse 36 or chapter 36.
If I were Esau, though, I'd have been like, "Where are they?" They said he said
That's
they
what
were
I was thinking.
here.
I would have done that. Well, I thought he said he was coming,
Why, like,
and
why didn't they sit down and have a meal together? Like, if it was only 20 miles away, that would
because
have
you would think
been,
maybe that would have caused more hard feelings if, hey, you didn't even bother to come and you said you were going to.
yeah. Like, I imagine Esau going home and preparing like food and a celebration, like something's off there. Any other thoughts before Kathy reads?
Okay. 1 to 16. Failing. Jacob had lifted up his eyes and seen the angels, and he had even seen God face to face. But when he saw Esau and his 400 men, he seemed to lose everything he had gained in the struggle with himself and with the Lord. It's one thing to be blessed on the mountaintop with God, and quite something else to carry that blessing down into the valley. Jacob failed himself, his family, and his God in several ways. Verse 1 and 2, by scheming instead of trusting. The prince with God stopped reigning and started scheming. Like too many of God's people today, he failed to live up to his new position in the Lord. By putting Rachel, his favorite wife, and Joseph, his favorite son, behind the other family members, he created a new problem in the home. And it's no wonder Joseph's brothers hated him in later years. You certainly knew where you stood in Jacob's household. By bowing instead of limping, verses 3 to 7. When Eastern peoples met in ancient days, they bowed often and exchanged traditional greetings, salam or shalom. But there was more than tradition involved in the way Jacob and his family greeted Esau. Jacob was now a prince with God, but he wasn't acting like it. I have seen servants on horses while princes walk on the ground like servants, said Solomon. And Jacob was exhibit A of this tragedy. After all, the elder, Esau, was supposed to serve the younger. So why should the younger brother bow? Jacob's strength was in his limp, for it was a constant reminder that God had conquered him and he could trust the Lord to see him through. Had Jacob limped, his brother would have noticed it and asked the cause, and that would have been Jacob's golden opportunity to tell him what God had done for him. You don't see Esau bowing. Instead, he ran to his brother, fell on his neck, and kissed him. By pleading instead of witnessing, verses 8 to 15. The fact that Esau ran to his brother, embraced him, kissed him, and wept is evidence that a change had taken place in his heart. Jacob was given an open door to talk with Esau about the past and get family matters straightened out. For after all, God's army was hovering near, and Jacob didn't have to be afraid. But instead of confessing his sins and giving witness to God's grace in his life, Jacob spent the time begging Esau to accept the gifts he had sent. Jacob said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God." Jacob had seen God face to face, but he said nothing to Esau about it. God has been gracious to me, he added, but he didn't tell his brother the facts and give God the glory. He didn't tell Esau that he had a new name, probably because he wasn't living up to it at that time. He had made a prince, but he was acting like a pauper. Now, there's a note here. Even if Jacob wasn't at his best, Esau still took what he said at face value and accepted the gifts as an expression of love and goodwill. Jacob talked about grace, but it was Esau who manifested grace. Sometimes the people of the world put God's people to shame.
I think it's interesting that he pointed out that he did not tell Esau his new name.
Mm-hmm.
His faith must not have been high enough.
By promising but not performing, verses 12 to 17a. Esau did the gracious thing and offered to accompany his brother south to his home in Mount Seir, but Jacob had no desire to spend more time with Esau than was necessary. Like his farewell with Laban, Jacob's meeting with Esau was a truce, not a true reconciliation. But Jacob gave the impression that his destination was indeed Mount Seir, and he offered every excuse he could think of to convince Esau to go on before him and let him proceed at his own pace. The repetition of the phrase, my lord, in this paragraph may indicate Jacob's respect and courtesy, but it also suggests that Jacob was groveling again. One thing was sure, Jacob was deceiving again. Esau started back to Mount Seir, traveling south, while Jacob moved northwest to Succoth and then further on to Shechem. There's no record that Jacob ever visited his brother in Mount Seir. It's likely that after they met at Isaac's funeral, they never saw each other again. And there's a reference there. It's for chapter 35, which I guess we'll get into. Delaying. God's command was that Jacob return to Bethel and then to his home where Isaac still lived, which was Hebron. Instead, he tarried first at Succoth and then settled near Shechem. At Succoth, the pilgrim was supposed to live in a tent, built a house. At Succoth, the pilgrim who was supposed to live in a tent built a house for himself and sheds for his flocks and herds. The word Succoth means booze. When he moved near Shechem, Jacob purchased a piece of property and became a resident alien in the land. He was settling down in the land. It's obvious that Jacob wasn't in a hurry to obey God and return to Bethel. We commend him for erecting an altar and giving public witness of his faith in the Lord, but sacrifice is no substitute for obedience. The name he gave the altar, God, the God of Israel, indicates that he claimed his new name, Israel, but he certainly wasn't living up to all that his name implied. Because he tarried in that part of the land, his daughter Dinah was raped and two of his sons became murderers. It was an expensive detour.
Oh, well, that's a good point. Can you read that again?
Yeah.
So in Succoth this happened or in Shechem?
I guess it would be Shechem.
Yeah.
Apparently God wanted him to return to Bethel, but he did not. So it says then, let me reread that. We commend him for erecting an altar and giving public witness of his faith in the Lord, but sacrifice is no substitute for obedience. And there's a reference there to 1 Samuel 15:22. The name he gave the altar, God, the God of Israel, indicates that he claimed his new name Israel, but he certainly wasn't living up to all that his name implied. Because he tarried in that part of the land, his daughter Dinah was raped and two of his sons became murderers. It was an expensive detour. So he was not, I take it there that he was not following what the Lord wanted him to do, even at that point, because he didn't go where he was supposed to go.
Yeah, and then he's mad at his sons when the story all plays out about this murder and them creating a bad relationship between him and this town or these people. So he wasn't obedient because he was supposed to go where? He was supposed to go to Bethel?
It says he was to return to Bethel. He wasn't in a hurry to obey God and return. Well, it says, and return the Bethel.
Is Seir in Bethel? Are they one and the same or near each
Seir?
other? Is that
Oh, Seir is where Esau is.
yeah? So did God want him to meet Esau and Seir, or is Bethel somewhere else?
Let me see.
I'm
Are
confused.
Bethel and Seir the same
SEIR.
place? No, they're not the same place. They are distinct locations. Bethel originally was a significant site in the narratives of Abraham and Jacob. is identified with the modern West Bank. Seir was a mountain range by the Dead Sea. Esau and his descendants, the Edomites, settled in Seir. So no, they're two separate places. So I don't know why he didn't go back.
What are the commentaries? Where do they get that information that God wanted him to go to Bethel?
And it doesn't have a reference for that. Let me look at First Samuel and see what that one is, where it had that. Yeah, that one just says, but Samuel replied, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. So that's basically just saying there that a sacrifice is no substitute for obedience, is what the commentary says, and then it referenced this 1 Samuel 15.
Yeah. Which I like that, 1 Samuel 15:22. So
I was kind of just trying to glance back through what we read over the last couple of chapters to see if God told him to go to Bethel in the dreams. He must have for him to. Whoop. We can look that up then, Kathy. Do you have more?
No, that was it. It
Maybe,
goes into 34 from there.
maybe Tony will have something. Okay, 33, 1 through 7. As Esau and his army of 400 men approached, Jacob bowed to the ground 7 times, humbling himself before Esau. To Jacob's surprise, Esau ran to meet him, hugged him, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Something had changed in Esau so that he no longer sought vengeance but reconciliation. 8 through 11. Jacob had sent a bevy of gifts to Esau to prevent Esau from attacking. But considering Esau's forgiving mood, it seemed that the gifts might prove unnecessary. But Jacob insisted that Esau share in his blessing because God had been gracious. This suggests that we become truly generous, not when we give out of compulsion, but when we realize God has given us all that we possess. 12 through 17, fearing a possible change of heart. Oh, that's a good point. He could have been afraid that Esau was going to change his mind. Fearing a possible change of heart, Jacob avoided traveling any further with Esau. Using his children and his flocks as an excuse, he appealed to Esau to go ahead, while Jacob himself would continue on slowly. Once Esau was out of sight and on his way back to Seir, Jacob changed directions and went to Succoth, which was in exactly the opposite direction. 18 through 20, Jacob arrived safely at Shechem in the land of Canaan, and like Abraham, so Shechem is in Canaan, like Abraham, set up an altar there, and he acknowledged that God had indeed brought him back to the land of promise. I think I like Worsby's commentary on this the best.
Well, maybe he couldn't go to Seir because that wasn't part of the promised land. Canaan.
Yeah, I started going way back, like when Jacob was trying to leave Laban, and God was kind of directing him to do that, and the wrestling, just all of that. If there was some instruction about where he should go, or in the very, 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 very beginning, where was he supposed to go? Take his family back home. It did tell him to go back home.
Okay, so then that would have been Canaan because that's where Abraham was.
So that's
that was part of the promised land.
That's where the Bethel comes in.
Because it
Yeah.
called it the house of God. Didn't he name that Bethel when he laid on the stone? Isn't that where the angels, he had the dream about the angels and then he named it Bethel?
Oh, I don't know.
I think you're right.
But that doesn't say that that's where like that God told him to go back there.
He just told him to go home, take his family and go home.
Well, and if he's still deceitful too, he might have been like, "Oh yeah, Esau's pretending like he doesn't care, but maybe once he gets me back there, like he's going to take me out." Maybe in the back of his head, that's what he was thinking, because he was groveling an awful lot. I'm trying to like remember if there's more to the story once we get going here.
Oh, yeah. Jehovah spoke to Jacob and told him, return to the land of your fathers and to your relatives there, and I will be with you. That's in 31:3. Um,
Well, in 35, we jump to where they do actually end up going to Bethel, and that's where Rachel ends up having Benjamin. Apparently, Isaac is still alive during this time because he lived for another 40 some years, so that he was with Laban for 20. Jacob was with Laban for 20 years, so that means that Isaac was still alive. So his father is Isaac, so he would have went back to Isaac, or was supposed to go back to Isaac.
so what's just weird is he and Esau agreed to go, together to go to Seir, but for some reason Jacob just didn't communicate.
Yeah. But then Esau and Jacob bury Isaac together. So they are apparently at peace at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and also at this point, Esau, like he wouldn't have had to have gotten the double portion yet because Isaac had not died yet.
If you think about it, back in those days, you could, I mean, how many times did people agree to meet somewhere and God only knows what happens along the way. Like you just don't ever get there. And to communicate was so hard and the distances were so far. It probably just happened all the time.
Well, and even if you look at how we are today with everything we have as far as communicating, how sometimes we drop the ball and we don't communicate with people, whether it's an old friend or even a sibling, or and we have much more opportunity to do that than what they would have.
Yep.
Just a thought.
Mm-hmm.
Mine says Jacob and Esau parted in peace, but they lived fairly close to each other until their father's death.
I
Doesn't
can
say
understand
where.
why Jacob didn't go unless he was on a mission. Like, but then he wasn't even on the mission to the right place. Any other thoughts? Commentaries? Insights? Wisdom?
Something that is really in mine, it says 33:4. Only God working in the heart of Esau explains the change in him as he greets Jacob in a friendly, not a hostile manner. And I think as we look at our own lives, I think we can see it, because the wrestling, we can see the wrestling with a lot of things. Even back then,
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day. Like, it would be nice if we could have extended peace all the time, but every single person struggles with something different
uh,
almost your entire
know.
life.
I know. And it's like, man, you want me to forgive? But then I go back to the cross. You know, you go back to the price that he paid on the cross. And what did he say? That's where the feet hit the pavement. You know, I think, whew, because it's something that God, you know, when I say something and God will go like that, I can just feel this hand on my shoulder going, child, who is in charge of that situation? Because I get in my flesh. And I'm looking at my childhood, you know,
Mhm.
and then I'm looking at the front going, whoa. Right?
Yeah. Well, you know, every single person stands before the Lord for what they do with their life.
Well, and you got to stand, you know, you got to set like that's where I'm wrestling with God, but I'm going, nope, I got to trust you, Lord. I got to trust you.
Well, and the rest of that, what Jesus said on the cross, I think, was, Lord, forgive them. They know not what they do.
Yep. And that's where, you know, when there is a change, a new name, right? If the person comes to the Father and the throne, that's the difference.
Okay. Any other thoughts? If not, we will do the trivia. Angie, you doing trivia? I don't know where Kathy went. All right, here we go. Peter was in his boat on which sea when Jesus called him to be a disciple?
Galilee.
Oh, man, that was quick. Yes, it was the Sea of Galilee, Matthew 4:18 and 19. Good job,
Hey, Kim.
Kimmy. Okay, this concludes the reading of God's word for today.
For
sure.
For certain.
Enjoy the beautiful sunshine while we have it, ladies.